My name is Jonathan Cook. I'm the Executive Director, and we're so thrilled that you can join us for this Lunch and Learn webinar discussing the Affordable Housing Needs Report in partnership with our friends and colleagues from the California Housing Partnership. Today, I'm joined by Kathy Cresswell from our Board of Directors, as well as Armand Serenabov from staff, and our friend and colleague Danielle Mazzella from the California Housing Partnership, where she is the Associate Research Director. So this afternoon, we're wanting to focus primarily on Sacramento, Placer, and Yolo counties. We'll be going through their report for 2025, as well as a really great data and interactive tool. We're also going to be covering some of the Sacramento Housing Alliance's policy recommendations. And we're wanting this webinar to also be interactive. So we're asking for your participation and for your feedback and questions. And so for the first part of the presentation, we are looking for you to ask questions if you would like to know how to use the data and tools in a better way. Also, for the section where we're going to be discussing policy recommendations, we would like to get some of your feedback and reaction to that as well. But as we start, Armand will be going through and flagging questions for us. If folks would like to enter in the chat, if you have the ability on Zoom, maybe say your name, the organization you're with, as well as which county you're from in our region, if you're joining us from the Greater Sacramento region. And we will also have the opportunity, if you're not able to do that, if you'd like to raise your hand, if you have a question that's relevant for the section we're covering, please do that too, and Armand will be able to flag that and allow us to entertain your questions. So thank you so much again for joining us this afternoon, and then I will kick it over to Danielle to start us off and to do an overview of the 2025 Affordable Housing Needs Report and to look at some other great data and tools. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bear with me as I share my screen. I'm going to go over sort of our findings through our tool, which you can find on our website at chpc.net housing needs. And at the landing page, you can kind of select either here or through this drop-down menu up to 4 counties or regions that you're interested in. So today I know we're talking about Placer, Sacramento, and Yolo. And going to go ahead and focus on these counties for the remainder of the presentation, unless somebody else chimes in that they're interested in something else. So here, as you enter the tool, you see these sort of 4 main buckets across the top of the screen. Here we have housing need, which has some of our very classic measures such as affordable home shortfall. We also have cost burden, overcrowding, and some other measures like tenure and other just categorizations by race and ethnicity. Clicking back on to look at the affordable housing shortfall for the 3 counties we're looking at today. We see that Sacramento has the largest shortfall with over 54,000 lower income renter households that do not have access to an affordable home. These numbers are a little bit smaller when we look at Placer and Yolo, but are still significant for those that are making less than 50% of area median income. This is one of our newer functionalities for this tool. We launched, I believe, in 2020 and have significantly grown this out. And in addition to this comparability function, you can switch the scale as you saw me do earlier. If you click on these interactive eye icons, it gives you sort of a high level description at what you're looking at and where we source the information from. Then we also have a functionality where you can download all of these charts. Some of you might be more familiar with sort of our PDF offerings, but all of those graphics and more are available on this tool. Moving on and looking at cost burden, we're going to look at all renter households by income group. And again, sort of leverage our compared geographies functionality to see what that looks like across those regions. We have 77% of extremely low income renter households experience severe cost burden. For those who are unfamiliar, cost burden is defined as spending more than 30% of your income towards housing cost, and severe cost burden is when you spend more than half of your income towards rent. This trend sort of continues as extremely low income households experiencing severe cost burden the most across all income groups and reaching 82% in Yolo County. For all of the regions, you see that severe cost burden hovers around 1 to 2% for incomes earning 80% or more of area median income, with the exception of placer or moderate income households experience it at 6%. One other functionality I wanted to quickly highlight is the download function. So in addition to downloading the image, you can also download the underlying data. So if you want a different color scheme, you wanted to include slightly different information as part of what this graphic is showing, you can download the raw data and design it as you see fit, as well as the standalone sort of a title, color scheme, etc., that you can easily put into your own presentations or other collateral. I'm going to stop briefly before I move on to some of the other buckets to see if there are any immediate questions. Please go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to move on to our second bucket,
Oh,
which
yes.
is, oh, go
Actually,
ahead.
so Robert had a question in the chat. I can reemphasize their question. So they asked, amazing tool, is there data you track around housing shortage across the board, not just at the low income level?
So we have that data on the back end. So as you can see, if I go quickly back to looking at cost burden, you see how we have all the income groups. We have shortfall data for some of the higher income groups, but given historically our organization's mission, we have seen that the shortfall for those income groups has been significantly less. And also the need has been always sort of exacerbated with those earning 50% of area median income below. But please feel free to reach out to me. I think my email will be made available at some point.
And can I
To
just say on that issue about need, if folks are interested, the housing elements and the state keeps track of what the need is for all income levels. And so every housing element has the need by income category. And every year, annually, they have to produce a report that describes how well they have met that need by year. So that's a really good source of data for housing need and how it's been met for each individual jurisdiction within this region and throughout the state. And most jurisdictions publish both their annual reports and their housing elements on their website. So it's usually pretty easy to access that data.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'll just actually jump ahead to a different bucket because we actually publish the RENA, the regional housing needs allocations at a county level and sort of highlight the largest jurisdictions. And I would also highlight that HCD has a tool as well sometime after jurisdictions submit the annual progress reports after April 1st. That similarly shows what progress is being made across the income groups.
Danielle, there was one question in the chat as well related. Do you aggregate data by legislative district in California for the Assembly and Senate?
We do not. Currently for this tool, because of the geographic limitations, the boundaries for districts don't align neatly with a lot of this data because it's collected by boundaries defined by the census. Some graphics could be compiled to that level, like multifamily housing production and our tracker on low-income housing tax credit production and preservation. But the ones we just kind of went through under our housing needs bucket, these are all rooted, except for for persons experiencing homelessness, are all sourced from the census.
Thank you.
And then I also saw that Lauren had a question as well. They asked if significant changes are made to how the US Census data obtains and maintains data, will that affect the data in this tool?
It will significantly affect our housing needs tab. We saw this during the pandemic. The census put out guidance for researchers broadly about being hesitant on aggregating data at smaller geographies and their hesitations to have some of the data compared at the height of that time period to other similar time periods. We notate all of this sort of in our methodology document. So on our right-hand side, if we have a functionality where you can kind of click and select and unselect certain regions as you see fit. We also have our methodology document and a web tutorial that'll show you a lot of the things I'm going through now. Okay, I'm gonna hop back over to the tab I was on with the RENA data, and I'll stop again if there are more questions. And so one of our other graphics that we have is showing multifamily housing production and how many new multifamily construction or new multifamily units were created during a year versus how many were demolished. As you can see in Placer, we have a net gain of over 1,200 units. And if we go down to other counties, we sort of see a similar trend, which is always a good thing. One thing to note is, unlike some of our other graphics, this is not sort of focusing on affordability. This is just sort of net how many new multifamily homes were created per year. The last graphic available on this bucket is us looking at tax credit production and preservation over time. So unlike the previous graphic, this does specifically look at, deed restricted affordable homes for each county and what was put into service each year. And so you sort of see some ups and downs in the general trend of new construction across the region, some more acquisition rehab than others, shown here in the light purple. And as you see, as I'm hovering over sort of this box, sort of updates with new data, which is supposed to be helpful in providing summary data as you sort of move through a graphic. If you ever feel like something's too small or you kind of want to see the trend on a different scale, you do have the ability to sort of drag and drop, and you will sort of resize it to focus on if you want to just look at a certain time period or just look at trends more specifically. This allows you to do that. And then if you click this reset zoom button at the top right, you can go back to the view you were at. Gonna go ahead and move to our state and federal funding bucket. Any quick questions before I go through these?
Kathy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just on the LIHTC charts, do you have a sense of that portfolio or whatever? Like what percentage also includes funds from like HCD? Um,
Yeah, we don't show it here. You can at a project level, we do.
okay.
We have that data as part of a different tool we're actually working on that looks at costs across affordable housing and
Yeah.
all of the different layering and funding that goes into creating affordable housing. So, um, as I'm sure many are aware on the call, you need tons of different sources layered on top of each other to produce or preserve housing. So I would say a significant amount of tax credits do also have some HCD funding, particularly in the 9% grouping. 4% is a little bit more hit or miss. Those are leveraging bonds, but yeah,
Okay.
whoever's really interested in that, I can go
And you
about
have
that.
this data, and you have this data for by project in the
Yes.
methodology?
No,
Oh, okay.
so this
Oh,
is a completely separate tool. So this is just showing based
totals or
on tax credit awards, like what has been created. And
okay.
so we make certain assumptions based on award dates, how long construction timelines take, and sort of try to plot that out over time.
Okay. All right. Thank
And
you.
yeah, okay. I'm going to move on to state and federal funding. Here we sort of show a comparison by fiscal year for both state and federal, and then we also have a state funding breakdown here, and it shows you all the different sources of funding captured over the time frame that we have. Here, the sort of zoom functionality can be really helpful because some of these numbers can get really small over time. And then as you hover over each of the individual subsections of the columns, you sort of get dollar values as well. This is available too as a downloaded, a standalone image, and the underlying data is also available as a CSV. So just going through and looking at state funding specifically throughout the different regions, we see Sacramento, as many counties as well, saw an all-time high in fiscal year 21, showing a big surge of state tax credits. And then for Yolo, this was just a general infusion of general and revolving funds. Details of what programs are sort of encapsulated in each of these propositions and funding sources are detailed in the methodology document. Any questions? I see something about the statewide data. Without resetting everything completely, if you just wanted to look at state data, you could reset this. Selecting this button in the middle left. And then if you select the greater region, everything defaults to the California. So no regions or counties would be selected, and all of the data we've kind of been walking through will be available at the state level.
So if you wanted to compare either the whole region or a particular county, like to the state, so,
Yes.
looking at does our region get its share of sort of statewide need? Does this tool sort of enable you to kind of make at least a little bit of an assessment on that?
Yeah, I mean, you could do comparisons between counties or just other geographies. So here we have sort of the sum totals in the tables for federal and state funding, and then also for the state. Then we also have grouped data by regions. And so here on in the drop-down menu, you can see that we have the Central Coast or the Greater Sacramento as an option. And if there's a desire to compare this to either the state or other regions, you can do that either by downloading either the backend data or the individual graphics themselves, or leveraging the compared geography functionality.
Good. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Moving to our last bucket of market trends. We track average asking rents by county and by region. We also look at vacancy and then who can afford to rent. We'll focus on the last two of who can afford to rent and the cost of living. I think more people are familiar with those. So we're going to click off Greater Sacramento and go back to our 3 counties.
And then,
And so, yes,
Danielle, Brenda was asking, is there a way to see what counties are grouped by region in California?
yes. So our regions, I'm hoping we'll be able to see this without messing anything up. Give me 1 second. So this is a different landing page where you can actually go directly and see which counties are within each region. And so if you click on one of the things, you get our pre-designed report, which I hope people here are familiar, or you see more than sort of our tool. But this is basically just a sort of high level, quick report we sort of put together, hoping that it's something you can quickly take to, or sort of easily take with you to a meeting, or to just demonstrate need in your community with some high level key findings, and then what we think are sort of the more compelling graphics that we have for each county. And so these sort of pre-designed reports are available for each county in the tool, as well as we have a separate, slightly different statewide report that we publish annually. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at Yolo a little bit more. And so in Yolo, we found that in 2024, renters needed to earn more than 2 times the minimum wage to afford the average asking rent. So the average asking rent in Yolo County was $1,900 a month, and you needed to be able to, the household would need to earn $36.92 an hour, or more than $76,000 a year, to pay 30% or less of their income towards rent. As we can see, state minimum wage doesn't come anywhere close, and sort of these other occupations we highlight also sort of fall short of what's needed, which I think speaks to some of our other graphics about unaffordability, how many people need affordable homes by county, as well as cost burden.
And those graphics are particularly useful in local advocacy because you can personalize what it means for those who can't afford. So instead of just talking about generically, you can talk about teachers or janitors or healthcare workers. And we've found personalizing it like that really makes your advocacy more profound and can really reach folks. So this is a terrific tool if you're doing local advocacy.
I
That's
did
great
have
to
a
hear.
question, Danielle. So for the methodology for determining the average asking rent by county, what size um, like apartment or housing were you looking at to determine the average asking rent, or was that based on the spread of rents available throughout the county?
So we leverage CoStar retail data on the average asking rent for two-bedroom apartments.
Based on a two-bedroom. Okay, perfect. Thank
Mhm.
you.
Yeah, and I would, we have curated this data in what we think would have been most helpful for a lot of our regional partners, and it's so helpful to hear Kathy say that these things are useful. So if there are any specific occupations that you all would want to see in comparison to some of these other things, please do feel to reach out and we can kind of work to see what we can put together. A lot of this is sourced from, with the exception of CoStar, is sourced from public data. So specifically, we get the sort of hourly wages specifically from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and can look up other occupations as needed.
And then we have another question as well, Danielle from Charles. They're asking, are you able to see information at the city level, or is county the smallest geographic level you can see?
Currently, our tool just has counties. Some of this data is available at the jurisdiction level, or some of the other geographies we're talking about earlier, like congressional districts or legislative districts. Uh, the ones that largely aren't available at smaller geographies is everything under the housing needs bucket because again, of the census boundaries and the data source we use, we leverage to sort of create them. But if you have something specific, particularly for these last three buckets that you'd like to see at a jurisdictional level, please reach out and we can see what we can do for you. Okay, I'm gonna go trying to just make sure I have a little bit last graphic, a little bit of time. And so this is some really great work put together by another statewide partner, United Ways of California, looking specifically at what it costs to live in each county, looking at housing, childcare, transportation costs, etc. They publish this annually in a report they call the real cost measure, which is linked to in our methodology document. But here we just wanted to demonstrate again where state minimum wage gets you. If you're only earning half of median income, where that gets you compared to what they have identified as what you need to sort of afford all of the necessities and the resulting deficit. So very low income households or those earning 50% of area median income or less face a deficit of $13,000, more than $13,000 based on the cost estimates here, which as you hover, you sort of get a dollar amount and in addition to the sort of percentage amount of the budget that's representative. Sacramento, you have a similar deficit where, housing is sort of taking up almost 30% of costs and followed closely by food and healthcare. Then lastly, Yolo, similar 30% of housing, 18% on food, and then healthcare, etc. And with a slightly higher deficit of 14,000 a year. Okay, any questions? Okay, the last thing I would mention is all of the pre-design reports are available here on the right, as also through our research publications library. And if you have any questions or feedback, we can be contacted here through the form when you click through here. Sort of would love your feedback and figuring out how to be a better resource for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. What an incredible resource. And we're always ever so grateful to our partners at the California Housing Partnership for their fantastic data and helping us to be able to aggregate that for our local advocacy, as Kathy reminded us. I think it's really striking that for the three counties that we highlighted, that the average rent is anywhere from, you would have to earn anywhere between $33 to $38 per hour to afford the average asking rent. So we know that residents in our communities are significantly cost burdened, and that's why this work is ever important and why we are wanting to make sure that we have local and tailored recommendations for each county. Which segues nicely into our next section, where we are going to be introducing some of our specific policy recommendations by county from the Sacramento Housing Alliance. But we're also wanting to receive some feedback and reaction from our viewers and our audience. So please ask questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to make sure that we're able to get to all of them. But at this time, I will turn it over to Kathy Cresswell from our Board of Directors. Thank you, Kathy.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thanks, Danielle. SHA has been really fortunate to use your data for, I don't know, I think you've been doing this for at least 10 years and more. And we also initially, when we were doing this with CHP, we included recommendations actually on the hard copy. It was before, you had your good website. So now we are continuing, though, that opportunity for us to share policy recommendations that really are related to the needs that have been identified. And we do those by county. And as in the past, we have frequently reached out to our partners in different counties to be able to highlight for them some of the recommendations we have, but also to hear from them what they're seeing on the ground, what they've seen works, and what they'd like to see more of. So we've done draft policy and strategy recommendations for each county. And we want to walk through some of the more important or the most significant ones. And and Jonathan said, we want to hear from you before we finalize these. So if you're in Placer and some of the recommendations we're making resonate, that's awesome. Let us know. If we have missed some things, let us know the things that you want to make sure we cover. Now, I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, but I'll go through some of the more significant ones. And a lot of the strategies are consistent throughout each county. So I'll start with some of those that we think are important, whether you're in a rural county or a more urbanized county. We think, for example, that every community, every county and the jurisdictions within should review all of their local policies and land use strategies with a racial equity and a DEI lens. We know that historically, land use patterns and sometimes frequently finance programs either directly discriminated against certain populations, and some of their strategies or some of their policies had the effect of discriminating or leaving some populations out. And so we think it's really important that communities take a look at all of those things with those lenses to make sure there are no absolute or what some local governments may say is inadvertent impacts. And so that's something that we think across the region is really important. And it's also just really important now, given some of the retreat that we're seeing at the federal level, and particularly when it comes to affirmatively furthering fair housing. But it's important to recognize our state has not retreated and still has laws and practices that really require that every jurisdiction affirmatively further fair housing. And so having that be part of local strategies is really important. The other thing which we think applies to every jurisdiction in this region is that they need to be looking to increase sources of affordable housing funding. And we know right now local governments have been very dependent on both state and federal funds to get the affordable housing that they have been seeing built. And we know that there's both a retreat at the federal level as well as a retreat at the state level. The state budget is being finalized as we speak, and it includes dramatically less funding than it has in the last few years. So it's really important then for local governments to look at what can they bring to ensure that the progress that they've been making on building affordable housing or preserving affordable housing continues. And so, for example, they can look for doing local funding sources like trying to get on the ballot something for a real estate transfer tax, a document recording fee, a luxury tax, sales tax initiatives, or even a local affordable housing bond. And, trying to start that work now, potentially to get those things on the ballot for 2026 does mean starting that work now. But it's really important, and we can share information about initiatives and campaigns that have been effective throughout the state. The other thing is important to know is that the state does have currently a proposal, both from Buffy Wicks in the Assembly and Senator Christopher Cabaldon in the Senate, to do a $10 billion affordable housing bond. So we also encourage everybody to get behind and advocate that those two measures do get passed. Right now, the proposal is to have them on the primary ballot instead of the November ballot for 2026, which means we're going to have to do a lot of work right now to get those bonds passed. So those are something everybody can and should do. The kinds of things, again, that Yolo might do versus what the city of Sacramento might do will be different based on resources and needs. But getting more local funding is absolutely critical. We also, in the documents that we'll have online, we have lots of links. So we have links to the statewide bond information. We also are recommending that you stay in touch with all the funding that is still available at HCD. So we have links that give you information about when the NOFAs will be published and which programs are still active. And so as advocates, you can keep track of that. So you can advocate to your leaders. We also think that virtually everybody has the opportunity to increase local revenue sources that you might already have. So the city and county of Sacramento, for example, have both in lieu fees as well as commercial linkage fees. And so those are locally generated sources of revenue that can go directly for affordable housing development. And if your communities don't have those things, then we can help direct you to resources that can help you set them up and tell you how well they've been working. And so having a local source like that you don't have to go through an initiative is important. I can take a pause here since I'm going on to see if there are any questions or.
Yes, I can look at the chat for you right now, Kathy.
Okay.
Veronica is asking, would the affordable housing bond replace the low-income housing tax credit or for gap financing?
I'm sorry, would it replace?
Yes.
No, it's a separate source. So it would fund it predominantly, correct me if I'm wrong, John, it predominantly funds existing state housing programs. So you'd be able to, those funds, which a lot of the money that was available from different propositions has been spent in the governor's funding. So those, it wouldn't replace them. So tax credits are going to continue, and this will ensure that the state agencies that had those funding before will be able to continue to have resources to add to some of the tax credits, since we know most developments need multiple sources of funding.
Right. And if I could add to that, Kathy, thank you for that question, Veronica. So if we're able to get that on the ballot for fall of 2026, which is the anticipated status of the assembly version of that bill right now, it would have funding for the MHP program, multifamily housing, the infill and infrastructure grant program. It would have funding for tribal and farm worker housing, and lots of other programs, including Cal HFA's down payment assistance program for first-time homebuyers, and additional for programs that include efficiency for affordable housing and rental assistance. And so this would be one-time funding where we would be putting out that general bond obligation, and that would provide additional funding in addition to the existing state programs and federal programs that are supplementing our affordable housing development and preservation currently.
Right. Okay. So other things that we think virtually every jurisdiction in this region should be looking at are promoting and using local and state surplus lands for the development of affordable housing. And housing elements that are had to be developed by each jurisdiction throughout our region include inventories of local public surplus lands. And so advocates and jurisdictions should be really promoting the use of those sites for as a resource for developing affordable housing. And it's the state, there has been amendments to the law year after year that have really made it much easier to use those sites for affordable housing. So we really encourage local advocates to work with their cities to find out where those sites are, make sure the development community is aware of those opportunities. When they are local public surplus lands, when the city or a county is going to be making them available for sale, they're supposed to be making that information available to affordable housing developers first. And so developers should also make sure they're getting that information. HCD will accept, you can write and ask them to put you on the list, and you can also work directly with your local governments. And in local governments, you've got both city sites, you've got your transit sites, so they've got school sites, all of which have the potential and typically are located in places that can be very advantageous for building additional affordable housing. The state also has done a inventory of state surplus lands and is really being aggressive about promoting those for use for affordable housing development. And we can give you, our paper has a link to both that site and some other sites on local public surplus lands that can be really helpful in expanding the resources available for affordable housing. So a couple other things, and then we'll talk a little bit briefly about, some of the ones that maybe are appropriate for Yolo or Placer. But we promote the development, the adoption or strengthening of local inclusionary programs. And in particular, we really advance the notion that instead of in lieu fees, if lands can actually, if there's a requirement to actually build the affordable housing, it both provides more opportunity for lower income families and workers to have access to real housing. But it also addresses more directly some of the past historic segregation that has occurred in many communities. So we think that's important. We also have strategies that we're recommending to prevent displacement. As development comes in, it can have impacts on existing residents. And so those are kinds of things, and we have more, but that's just a highlight quickly of some of them. The other thing, so in looking at like communities like Placer and perhaps all communities, we also think you can look at strategies to support employer-assisted housing. Many areas of the state, advocates and the local governments have worked with local big employers to help them establish either down payment assistance programs. They've done rental assistance, and they've actually helped in the construction of affordable housing. And we have some links to communities and businesses who have done those kind of things that might be relevant to your communities. For areas like Yolo that might have agricultural workers, we have recommendations on how to increase affordable housing for and what resources might be available for agricultural workers. We think that, both a lot of areas can do more to encourage infill development, and in particular by doing that in ag areas, by promoting the development of infill, including things like ADUs, second units, those kinds of things. You can better meet your climate objectives, and as well, you have a better opportunity to preserve ag land for agricultural uses. So we can meet our housing needs as well as meet some of our climate and agriculture and land preservation needs. A program that's available and useful in every communities is promoting the preservation and improvement of local mobile home parks, which frequently are the only sites available for low-income families and seniors, or the only types of housing. The state still has some resources available to do that, and we can share that with you. So I'm not going to go into any more details, but these are the kinds of strategies we're looking at recommending, and we're really anxious to hear, do these sound right to you? Are there things we're missing that you think we should be recommending? So kind of like to open it up to folks to hear if these kind of strategies make sense for the communities you're in. What else we could be doing that would be helpful to housing advocates and affordable housing developers in this region. By what else should we be promoting? So you can either raise your hand or post something in the chat. I know it's a lot to absorb, but just generally, do these sound like strategies that work or that might be helpful?
Veronica added in the chat from Placer County that she is grateful that inclusionary is on our list for each of the counties. Thank you
Yeah.
for your comment, Veronica, and for your input on the recommendations for Placer County.
Yeah, and so, we can also, I see Michael's question. What is SHA thinking about the elimination of some federal housing programs and what influence they have on state programs? Well, it's not entirely clear yet the level of the cuts that are going to happen in HUD, but we know they're severe. CHP does a lot of federal work. We are monitoring it. There's, in terms of influence, we participate both with our national partners and our state regional partners on advocacy through our legislators to maintain those programs, particularly like the housing choice vouchers, which we're going to take a huge hit initially. They seem less like it, but there's not a lot of stuff we can do, but we are engaged with our partners and really appreciate the leadership that CHPC and others are doing at the federal level. I mean,
I
we
would
know.
just,
Go ahead. Sorry.
if I could just add to that too, I think you did a great job of overviewing that as well. I always am looking for glimmers of hope. And so like Kathy mentioned, the housing choice vouchers were preserved in the continuing resolution that Congress passed earlier this year. But we are concerned about the the upcoming budget, proposed cuts of over 40% to HUD's overall budget, which would be devastating for communities across our region and across the country. Um, but one area of hope that I'm a little optimistic about is that we had bipartisan support from our congressional delegation for the region for the bill that would reauthorize the LIHTC funding at the federal level. And so we had support from local elected officials, big city mayors in our region, and we were involved in a little bit of the advocacy work along with CHPC. So trying to remain optimistic, I think it really matters for folks to be able to speak up, speak to your local elected officials, tell them why these are critical sources of funding for residents in your communities and for the communities that you serve. I think that's one of the most impactful things that we can each do, and it just takes a few minutes. So thank you for your advocacy across the region.
Yeah, and I see some comments on, sort of training, um, elected officials. We have SHA has conducted now a number of. We worked with SACOG and did a training on how affordable housing is financed to make sure that they understand sort of both the challenges and what the steps are and where local governments actually have impact and influence. So we both talked about the financing, but also just the local development process. What a local developer goes through when trying to initially find sites and all of that. So we've done that, and we're looking for other ways that we can help arm both advocates with the information they need to advocate on the issues that are important to them. And again, we think it's important also to make sure elected officials and the staff understand those challenges so that they can be better partners as we're trying to address all of these issues.
And then Sammy has a question.
Or unique prevailing wage or local hire requirements as part of the proposed bond. I can't remember, Jonathan. Do you?
I would have to check on that. I don't know the specifics. I know that for certain state funding sources, that prevailing wage is triggered. I would have to check on that and get back to you, Sammy. Thank you for the question.
And
Well,
then I also wanted to highlight Robert's comment earlier, saying that they would love to see data on cost to build per unit and perhaps time to build. Not sure if this data is available, but would be interesting to see how those two metrics are trending.
So we conducted, sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
We have some of that specifically for tax credit development that we've looked at internally to sort of promote our advocacy. Published public stuff, the Turner Center out of UC Berkeley has published data on costs. I can't recall if they speak about timing, but I do know that a number of sort of the housing think tanks or housing academic research centers have been focused a lot on this recently, thinking about how decreasing timelines, how certain proposals, particularly like the one-stop shop, can help with speeding up project timelines. So yeah, I would look at the Turner Center as maybe just a first starting point. And then I know we recently published a blog regarding the one-stop shop proposal. Kathy?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, there are some resources that can give you some of that. The state at one time published a report, but now that on specific costs, and tried to actually compare market rate developers to affordable developers. But that now is kind of old, but it did give you just some sort of senses of the differences. But everybody is concerned, as we all are, on how much it costs and how to reduce those costs. We know affordable housing developers are doing everything they can to reduce costs. And so we still look to what else can local governments do, and folks looking at the consolidation of the state housing agencies are looking to create efficiencies so that you can reduce some of the layering. All of that adds costs. So it's in everybody's interest that we figure out how to tackle that one. Understanding our development community, particularly the affordable development communities, doing everything it's in their interest to reduce costs so that they can produce more units and better serve their residents.
And then did we answer Erica's question? How is or is SHA keeping track or monitoring city and county RENA numbers and where they're each at with meeting those?
Yeah, we have been, we've been engaged when elements were first being developed, and we made recommendations, we reviewed, and every year we look at the annual reports to see how jurisdictions are doing. We're in the process now of starting to set up meetings with those jurisdictions where we see more progress is needed. We hope at some point to be able to sort of publish some of that and really highlight where we think good things are happening, but as well, more where more advocacy and more work needs to happen. That's another place, though. Right now, if you're interested, HCD's website on the annual reports, you can get jurisdiction level data, and it does produce every year how many units have been permitted or built each year by income level. So it's a great source of data, but then also for us in advocacy, because they go through every program they promise to do in their housing elements, whether they've done it yet and what progress they've made. So we're following it. What we hope to be able to have more resources to be able to do is really start then publishing that and then working with the community more broadly, so that everybody has the tools, and when they want to advocate, they have a resource and a tool of what's happening right now and where communities can do better.
And then did we also, thank you for the response, Kathy, look over Michael's question as well? They're asking, so the Senate's draft budget zeroes out numerous programs. For example, project-based vouchers are zeroes out, which housing choice vouchers get bundled into the state administered block grant idea. Do you have any insights to how seriously state and local officials taking these budget proposals?
I can speak to the legislature. I know that that's a big concern for leadership. They're really worried about the potential of California having to backfill housing, and then if they're having to also backfill healthcare, that's going to really impact a lot of the programs that the state is able to support. Obviously, we don't have the resources that the federal government does that we rely on to come back to the state if those programs and resources disappear. So, we're really working with advocates to continue that advocacy to, really impress on members of Congress from our region and leadership and Congress to preserve these programs that impacts every community and every congressional district across the country. And it's really going to set this country as well as our region behind if we're not able to continue to build on the progress that we've made to date. Excellent. Well, I think we are a little close to time. So I really do want to thank in particular Danielle from the California Housing Partnership for your fantastic presentation and for the partnership we have with your organization over many years. And real deep appreciation for the data that you're able to provide for advocates like SHA and our members, as well as for conversations that we're able to have with local elected officials and with legislators, and why these programs are so impactful for our communities at the local level when we're looking at these needs by county across the state. We represent an incredibly diverse region, and the housing needs are incredibly varied. When you're looking at the need for more farm worker housing in Yolo County, to workforce housing up in the Tahoe Basin and Placer and El Dorado counties, as well as for urban infill in Sacramento and many of the urban areas that we represent through the SACOG region here in the Greater Sacramento region. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Kathy, in particular, for outlining our policy recommendations from the Sacramento Housing Alliance. We will be finalizing these and sharing these out, and this presentation has been recorded as well. So this is something that we'll be able to share out with folks as well as individuals who weren't able to join us this afternoon. So if you have any questions, I believe that Armand has been able to drop in the chat a few of our emails, as well as a link to our website and additional resources that have been shared throughout the presentation. And as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're a resource here for the community, as well as the California Housing Partnership. They have fantastic data, as well as their advocacy work, that if you have any questions, I know that they're also a resource that we rely on as well. And with that, we are at time. Thank you, everyone. We hope you